Elena Morrison didn't know that the man who would slide into the empty chair across from her was the most powerful alpha in the world. She didn't know that he had been searching for her his entire life, and she certainly didn't know that her worst night was about to become the beginning of everything. The restaurant was too expensive for her. Elena knew this the moment she stepped through the heavy glass doors and saw the chandeliers, the white tablecloths, the servers in pressed uniforms moving between tables like dancers. Her sister had insisted on this place for the blind date, claiming it would make the right impression. But all Elena felt was the familiar weight of not belonging. She tugged at the hem of her black dress, borrowed from that same sister, and gave her name to the hostess. The woman's practiced smile never wavered as she led Elena to a table by the window, but Elena caught the quick glance at her simple shoes, her discount store purse. Heat crawled up her neck. "Your companion will be along shortly," the hostess said, and Elena nodded, sliding into the booth and immediately checking her phone. 7:32. Marcus was already 2 minutes late. The minutes stretched like hours. Elena ordered water, declined the wine list, and watched couples at other tables lean across candlelit surfaces toward each other. At 7:45, she called her sister. "He's probably just stuck in traffic," Claire said, but her voice carried that familiar edge of disappointment. "You did tell him the right place, didn't you?" "Of course I told him the right place." Elena's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not completely hopeless." "I didn't say you were hopeless, I just—" Claire sighed. "Look, just give him a few more minutes. Marcus is a good catch. Lawyer, drives a BMW, actually owns his own place. You need to make this work." Eleanor wanted to ask why she needed to make anything work, why her worth was measured by whether some stranger showed up to dinner, but the words stuck in her throat like they always did. "I'll wait." At 8:15, Marcus finally appeared. Eleanor recognized him from the photo Claire had shown her. Tall, dark hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. He slid into the seat across from her without an apology, already pulling out his phone. "Sorry, crazy day at the office." He didn't look up from his screen. "You're Elena, right?" "Yes." She forced a smile. "It's nice to meet you." "Mm-hmm." His thumbs moved across his phone screen. "Listen, I can't stay long. Got a conference call with Hong Kong in an hour." Elena's stomach dropped. An hour. He was planning to be gone in an hour, which meant this whole evening was already over before it had begun. She nodded and picked up her menu, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled. The server appeared, a young man with kind eyes who seemed to sense the awkwardness radiating from their table. "Good evening. Can I start you folks off with some drinks?" "Whiskey neat," Marcus said without looking up. "Make it a double." "And for you, miss?" "Just water, please." Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she intended. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly throughout the server's recitation of specials. He ordered the most expensive steak without consulting Elena, who mumbled something about the salmon before the server disappeared again. "So," Marcus said, finally setting his phone face down on the table, "Claire tells me you work at some non-profit thing." "I'm a social worker." Elena straightened her shoulders. "I help families navigate the adoption process." "Right." His phone buzzed and his eyes flicked to it. "That's nice." The conversation limped along for 20 minutes. Marcus checked his phone 17 times, Elena found herself counting, and answered 3 calls. Each time he held up a finger in her direction, like she was a waitress he was dismissing. When their food arrived, he barely touched his steak. Then his phone rang again. "I have to take this," he said, already standing. "Work thing." Elena watched him pace by the windows, gesticulating wildly at whoever was on the other end. She cut her salmon into small pieces and tried to ignore the way the elderly couple at the next table kept glancing over with pity in their eyes. Marcus returned 5 minutes later, but he didn't sit down. "Look, I'm really sorry, but I have to run. Emergency at the office. Client crisis, you know how it is." He was already pulling on his jacket. "Rain check?" He didn't wait for an answer. He dropped 2 20s on the table and walked away, leaving Eleanor sitting alone with 2 full dinners and the burning certainty that there would never be a rain check. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor stared at the empty chair across from her, at Marcus's barely touched steak, at the wine glass he'd never even filled. Around her, the restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, but she felt like she was trapped in a bubble of her own mortification. The server approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, miss? Can I box up your companion's meal?" "He's not coming back." The words scraped her throat raw. Could you bring the check, please?" She was calculating how much of her paycheck this disaster would cost when a shadow fell across her table. Eleanor looked up, expecting the server, and found herself staring into the most devastating pair of amber eyes she had ever seen. The man standing beside her table was nothing like Marcus. Where Marcus had been all sharp angles and expensive cologne, this stranger radiated a kind of quiet power that made the air around him seem to shimmer. He was tall, taller than Marcus, with dark hair and features that belonged in museums, but it was his eyes that stopped Elena's breath in her chest. Golden amber, like honey held up to sunlight, and they were looking at her like she was the only person in the room. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was warm whiskey and dark chocolate. "Is this seat taken?" Elena blinked. What?" Without waiting for permission, the stranger slid into the chair Marcus had abandoned. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, settling into the space like he belonged there, like he had always belonged there. "He didn't deserve you," he said simply. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at this beautiful stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to deliver exactly what her bruised heart needed to hear. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His amber gaze never wavered from her face. "I know that any man who would walk away from this table is a fool." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that Marcus had every right to leave because she was exactly as forgettable as she'd always suspected. But something in those golden eyes stopped her. The server appeared again, looking confused. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this table is—" "Bring us a bottle of your best wine," the stranger said without turning around. His voice carried an authority that made the server straighten unconsciously. "And clear away this." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's abandoned steak. "We'll be starting fresh." The server nodded and hurried away, and Eleanor found herself alone with this impossible man who had just taken control of her evening like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm Dominic," he said, extending a hand across the table. Eleanor stared at his hand, strong, scarred across the knuckles, with fingers that could probably snap her wrist without effort. Something deep in her chest pulled tight, like a golden thread being tugged. She had never felt anything like it. "Elena," she whispered, and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the world shifted. Heat shot up her arm, spreading through her chest and settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. Dominic's pupils dilated, and she knew he felt it too, this impossible thing that had no name. "Elena," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound like a prayer. Perfect. She wanted to ask what was happening, why her entire body felt like it was waking up for the first time, why this stranger looked at her like she hung the stars. But before she could form the words, the server returned with wine and the promise of a night that would change everything. Elena Morrison still didn't know who Dominic really was, but as he poured wine into her glass and smiled at her like she was precious, she found herself not caring about anything except the way his presence made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her table. Someone had chosen her. She just had no idea how much that choice would cost them both. The wine Dominic ordered cost more than Elena's monthly grocery budget. She knew this because she glimpsed the server's reverent expression when he presented the bottle, the way he handled it like it contained liquid gold, which, considering the price, it probably did. You don't have to, Elena started, but Dominic raised a hand, silencing her with nothing more than a look. I want to, he said simply, and something in his voice made it impossible to argue. Elena watched him pour the wine with steady hands, noting the way every server in their section seemed to hover nearby. The hostess had appeared twice to ask if they needed anything, her professional mask slipping into something closer to awe when she looked at Dominic. Even the busboy lingered longer than necessary when clearing Marcus's abandoned place setting. "Are you famous or something?" Elena asked, accepting the wineglass he offered. Dominic's smile was enigmatic. "Something like that." The wine was perfect, of course, rich and smooth, nothing like the cheap bottles Elena occasionally bought for herself. She took a careful sip and tried not to think about how out of place she was, how this beautiful stranger could afford to drop hundreds of dollars on wine for a woman he'd just met. "Tell me about your work," Dominic said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. "Social work, wasn't it?" Elena blinked, surprised he'd been listening during her disastrous conversation with Marcus. "You were watching us." "I was watching you." His amber eyes held hers steadily. "There's a difference." Heat crawled up Elena's neck. "I help families navigate adoption. It's not very exciting." "I think you're wrong about that." Dominic's voice was gentle but firm. "What could be more important than helping children find their homes?" The sincerity in his tone made something tight in Elena's chest loosen. Marcus had called her work some non-profit thing, with the kind of dismissive tone reserved for hobbies, but Dominic spoke like what she did mattered. "It can be heartbreaking sometimes," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "When placements don't work out, or when families fall through. There was this little girl last month, Emma. She'd been waiting for a family for 3 years. When we finally found the perfect match, they changed their minds at the last minute." "What happened to her?" "She's still waiting." Elena's voice caught slightly. "She's 8 now, and the older they get, the harder it becomes." Dominic was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You care about them, really care." "They deserve someone who cares." Elena took another sip of wine, feeling it warm her from the inside. "Most of them have been let down so many times already." "Like you were tonight." The observation was quiet, but it hit like a physical blow. Elena's hand tightened around her wineglass. "That's different." "Is it?" She wanted to argue, to tell him that adults getting stood up on dates was nothing like children being abandoned by the system, but the gentle understanding in Dominic's eyes suggested he saw the connection she was trying to deny. "I'm used to disappointment," she said finally. "It's not like I was expecting Prince Charming to sweep me off my feet." "Maybe you should expect more." The words were said so quietly that Eleanor almost missed them. When she looked up, Dominic was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something almost predatory in his focus, but not in a way that frightened her. More like a wolf who had finally found what he'd been hunting for. "Easy for you to say," Elena murmured. "You don't know what it's like to be ordinary." "Ordinary?" Dominic repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you think you are?" "I know what I am." Elena's laugh came out hollow. "I'm the sister people set up on blind dates because they feel sorry for her. I'm the woman men leave sitting alone in restaurants. I'm Elena." The way he said her name stopped her mid-sentence. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and the intensity there took her breath away. "You are the furthest thing from ordinary that I have ever encountered," he said, and every word rang with absolute conviction. "Any man who can't see that is blind." The air between them crackled with something electric. Elena felt that strange pulling sensation again, like invisible threads connecting her to this impossible man. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she had the wild thought that he could probably hear it. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know that you've spent your life helping other people find their families because you understand what it's like to feel unwanted." His voice was rough around the edges now. I know that you're brave enough to keep trying, even when the world keeps proving you right about being disappointed, and I know that you're sitting here with me instead of running home to hide, which means you're braver than you think you are." Eleanor stared at him, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. Nobody had ever seen her so clearly, certainly not after knowing her for 30 minutes. It was terrifying and thrilling and impossible all at once. "What about you?" she managed. "What do you do?" Something flickered across Dominic's face, too quick for her to identify. "I run a large organisation. Family business, you could say." "That's vague." His smile was almost apologetic. "It's complicated." Before Elena could press him further, their server appeared with fresh menus. Dominic ordered for both of them, without consulting her, but somehow he chose exactly what she would have wanted. The lobster risotto she'd been eyeing but couldn't afford, the chocolate soufflé that required advance ordering. "How did you know?" she asked after the server disappeared. "Know what?" "What I wanted. You didn't even ask." Dominic's smile was mysterious. Lucky guess. But it hadn't been a guess, and they both knew it. There was something happening between them that defied explanation, something that made her skin tingle whenever he looked at her. When their hands had touched earlier, Eleanor could have sworn she'd felt electricity arc between them. "Are you married?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop it, and she immediately felt her face burn. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No," Dominic said simply. "I've been waiting." "For what?" His golden eyes held hers. "For you." The words should have sounded like a pick-up line. They should have made her laugh or roll her eyes or both. Instead, they settled into her chest like truth, warm and certain and completely inexplicable. Elena's phone buzzed against the table, making them both jump. Claire's name flashed across the screen, and Elena felt her stomach drop. "I should—" "Answer it," Dominic said, but something had shifted in his expression, something darker. Elena swiped to accept the call. "Hi, Claire. How's it going? Please tell me you haven't scared him off yet." Claire's voice was loud enough that Elena was sure Dominic could hear every word. "Actually, because Marcus texted me about an hour ago complaining about some work emergency. I told him he'd better not have left you sitting there like some pathetic—" "Claire." Eleanor's voice came out sharper than intended. "I'm fine." "Are you still at dinner? Did he come back? Because if he ditched you, I swear I'm going to—" "He left." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "About an hour ago." Silence. Then, "Oh, Eleanor, honey, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come get you? We can grab ice cream and talk about what a jerk he is." Elena glanced at Dominic, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Dark, dangerous, like he was listening to every word and filing them away for later use. "I'm actually still at dinner," Elena said carefully. "What do you mean? With who?" "Someone else. Someone—" Elena looked into Dominic's amber eyes and felt that golden thread in her chest pull taut. "Someone better." After she hung up, Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Your sister," he said finally, and it wasn't a question. "She means well." The defence came automatically, even though Eleanor wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Does she? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor wanted to argue, to defend Claire like she always did, but something in Dominic's voice suggested he'd heard more than just the surface of that conversation. "She worries about me," Elena said instead, "or she makes you think she does." Before Elena could ask what he meant, their food arrived. The lobster risotto was perfect, and Elena found herself relaxing despite the strange undercurrents of their conversation. Dominic told her stories that made her laugh, asked questions that made her think, and listened to her answers like every word was precious. When they finally stepped outside the restaurant 3 hours later, Eleanor felt like she was floating. The night air was cool against her skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that the evening was ending. "Let me drive you home," Dominic said, and Elena looked around for his car. Instead of pointing to one of the vehicles parked along the street, Dominic raised his hand. A black sedan appeared from nowhere, or at least from somewhere Elena hadn't been looking, and pulled up to the curb. The driver got out and opened the rear door without a word. "You have a driver," Elena said stupidly. "Sometimes." Dominic's hand settled on the small of her back, guiding her toward the car. "It's practical." Elena slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent and tried not to gawk at the interior. The partition between them and the driver was up, creating an intimate bubble of space. "Where to?" Dominic asked, and Elena gave him her address. The drive passed too quickly. They talked easily about books and movies and nothing important, but Elena found herself hanging on every word. When they pulled up outside her modest apartment building, she felt a sharp pang of disappointment. Dominic walked her to the front door, and Elena fumbled with her keys, suddenly nervous. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him, "for dinner, for everything. Tonight was supposed to be awful, and you made it wonderful." Dominic stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Elena?" "Yes." "Can I see you again?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, like her answer mattered more than anything else in the world, made her chest tight. "I'd like that," she whispered. Dominic smiled, and for a moment Elena thought he might kiss her. Instead, he reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Tomorrow night," he said. "I'll pick you up at 7. It wasn't really a question, but Elena found herself nodding anyway. "Okay." She watched his car disappear into the night and climbed the stairs to her apartment in a daze. Tomorrow night. She was going to see him tomorrow night. Elena Morrison still had no idea who Dominic really was, but as she fell asleep that night, she dreamed of amber eyes and gentle hands, and for the first time in her life, she believed that maybe, just maybe, someone like him could want someone like her. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was absolutely right about that. Elena had never been on a second date before. The thought struck her as she sat in the small coffee shop Dominic had suggested, nervously smoothing her skirt and checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. In her limited dating experience, first dates were disasters and second dates were myths. But here she was, waiting for a man who had looked at her like she hung the stars. The coffee shop was nothing like the restaurant from the night before. Cosy and warm, with mismatched furniture and local art covering the walls, it felt like the kind of place where people actually belonged rather than performed. Elena had arrived 15 minutes early, too anxious to wait at home, and now she was regretting the decision as her nerves multiplied in the silence. When Dominic walked through the door at exactly 7 o'clock, Elena's breath caught the same way it had the night before. He moved through the space like he owned it, drawing glances from every woman in the vicinity, but his amber eyes found hers immediately and stayed there. "You're early," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I was nervous," Elena admitted, then immediately felt her cheeks burn. "I mean, good." Dominic's smile was warm and entirely too appealing. "I was nervous too." Elena blinked. "You were?" "Terrified," he said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing. "What if you changed your mind? What if you decided that strange men who insert themselves into your disasters aren't worth a second chance?" "Well," Elena said, surprising herself by teasing back, "the jury's still out on that one." Dominic laughed, and the sound sent warmth spiralling through Elena's chest. She was getting used to that feeling, the way her body responded to his presence like he was sunlight and she'd been living in shadows. They ordered coffee and pastries, falling into conversation as easily as they had the night before. Dominic asked about her work again, and Eleanor found herself telling him about Emma, the 8-year-old still waiting for a family. "There's this program," Elena said, gesturing with her coffee cup. "It pairs older kids with mentors while they wait for permanent placement. I've been trying to get it approved for months, but the bureaucracy is—" She made a frustrated gesture. "Complicated," Dominic supplied. "Impossible." Elena sighed. These kids need consistency, someone who shows up for them even when everything else is uncertain. But the department is worried about liability and background checks and funding. Dominic was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. What if the funding wasn't an issue? Elena looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone wanted to donate to make this program happen? What would you need? Dominic. Elena's voice came out smaller than intended. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. The words were said simply, but there was something underneath them that made the air shimmer. Authority, power, the kind that moved mountains and didn't ask permission. Before Elena could process that fully, the television mounted in the corner of the coffee shop flickered to the evening news. Elena glanced at it absently, then froze. Alpha King Dominic Blackwood concluded his address to the Supernatural Council today, emphasizing the need for unity among the shapeshifter communities. The words hit Elena like ice water. She stared at the screen, at the man in the expensive suit standing behind a podium, and felt the world tilt sideways. It was him. It was Dominic. Has led the Northern Pack for over a decade, making him the youngest Alpha King in recorded history. His policies on human shifter integration have been controversial, but his supporters claim... Elena's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the table with a crash that sent hot liquid splashing across the surface. She barely noticed. Alpha King, the most powerful shapeshifter alive. The man sitting across from her, who had bought her dinner and made her laugh and looked at her like she was precious, was the Alpha King. Elena. Dominic's voice seemed to come from very far away. Elena, look at me. She couldn't. She couldn't breathe. The walls of the coffee shop felt like they were closing in, and her vision was starting to tunnel at the edges. Alpha King. He could have anyone. He could have queens and princesses and women who belonged in his world. Instead, he was sitting in a coffee shop with a nobody social worker who lived in a studio apartment and bought her clothes on clearance. Why? The words scraped her throat raw. Why didn't you tell me? Dominic leaned forward, his hands flat on the table between them. Because I wanted you to know me first. Know you? Elena's laugh came out broken. I don't know anything about you. You're the Alpha King. You rule over millions of people. You have power I can't even comprehend, and you're sitting here pretending to be interested in my pathetic little life. It's not pretending. The sharpness in Dominic's voice cut through her panic. Elena, look at me. This time she did. His amber eyes were blazing with something fierce and desperate. I've been searching for you my whole life, he said quietly. Do you understand what that means? Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. It means you're my mate. The words hit the coffee shop like a bomb. Several conversations stopped abruptly, and Elena was dimly aware of people turning to stare. You're the other half of my soul, the one person in the entire world who was made for me. That's impossible. Elena was standing now, though she didn't remember getting to her feet. People like you don't end up with people like me. This is some kind of mistake or joke or... Eleanor. The command in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. Dominic was standing too, and suddenly she was reminded that he wasn't just a man. He was a predator, an alpha, something with the power to destroy her without breaking a sweat. I know this is overwhelming, he said, his voice gentler now. I know it doesn't make sense, but what you're feeling, that pull, that connection, that's real. That's the bond recognizing what it's waited for. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. I can't do this. You don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm nothing special. You're everything. The words stopped her cold. You're everything, Dominic repeated, stepping closer. You're brave and kind and beautiful, and you've spent your life helping people who need you. You're exactly what I've been looking for, exactly who I've been waiting for. But I'm human. The admission came out as a whisper. I know. I don't have power or status or anything that makes sense for someone like you. I don't care. You should care." Elena's voice was rising now, and she could hear the edge of hysteria creeping in. "You should care that everyone will think you're insane for choosing me. You should care that I have no idea how to be a queen or how to fit into your world or—" "Elena." Dominic's hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "Stop." She looked up at him, into those impossible amber eyes, and felt something crack open in her chest. "I'll wait," he said simply. "However long you need to understand this, however long it takes for you to trust me, I'll wait." "What if I can't?" The question came out broken. "What if I'm not brave enough?" "Then I'll wait anyway." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "But you are brave enough. You've been brave your whole life." Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that this impossible thing was real, that someone like him could want someone like her. But the voice in her head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Claire, whispered that this was too good to be true. "I need time," she whispered. Dominic nodded, his hands falling away from her shoulders. "Take all the time you need." Elena grabbed her purse and fled. She made it halfway down the block before the tears started, and by the time she reached her apartment, she was sobbing. She climbed the stairs to her studio, fumbled with her keys, and collapsed on her couch in a heap of confusion and overwhelming emotion. Her phone rang 20 minutes later. Claire. "How was coffee with Mystery Man?" Claire's voice was bright with curiosity. "Please tell me he's still interested after seeing you in daylight." "Claire." Elena's voice came out thick with tears. "Oh no! What happened? Did he turn out to be married, broke, living with his mother?" "He's the Alpha King." Silence. Then, "What?" "The man I'm seeing. He's Dominic Blackwood, the Alpha King." More silence. Eleanor could practically hear Claire's brain processing this information. "Elena," Claire said finally, her voice strange. "Are you sure? Because if this is some kind of joke, I saw him on the news. It's him." "Holy shit!" Claire's voice had gone breathless. "Elena, do you have any idea what this means?" "It means I'm in way over my head." "It means you've hit the lottery." Claire's excitement was palpable through the phone. "Elena, he's the most powerful man in the supernatural world. If he's really interested in you, if he really wants you—" "He says I'm his mate." Claire's sharp intake of breath was audible. "His mate? Elena, that's permanent, that's forever, that's—" "Impossible." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Claire, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to handle this." "You don't handle it," Claire said firmly. "You embrace it. Eleanor, this is your chance. This is your chance to be somebody, to matter, to— To what? To be a queen? Claire, I can barely manage my own life, let alone rule a kingdom." "You'll learn." Claire's voice had taken on that familiar edge of impatience. "Elena, you can't mess this up. Do you understand me? You cannot let this opportunity slip away." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of her sister's expectations settle on her shoulders. But underneath that, threading through her confusion and fear, was the memory of amber eyes looking at her like she was precious. "I need to think," Elena said. "Don't think too long," Claire warned. "Men like that don't wait forever, mate bond or no mate bond." After Elena hung up, she sat in her dark apartment and tried to make sense of what had happened. Dominic Blackwood, the Alpha King, wanted her. Not just wanted her, claimed she was his mate, the other half of his soul. It should have felt like a fairy tale. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no idea how far the fall would be. Elena pulled her laptop into her bed and spent the next hour researching everything she could find about Dominic Blackwood. The articles painted a picture of a powerful, ruthless leader who had united the shifter packs through a combination of diplomacy and barely restrained violence. He was photographed at galas and state dinners, always with beautiful women who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Women nothing like her. Elena stared at a photo of Dominic in a tuxedo, his arm around a stunning brunette at some charity function, and felt her heart sink. This was his world. These were his people. What place could someone like her possibly have in it? But then she remembered the way he had looked at her in the coffee shop, the desperation in his voice when he'd said he'd been searching for her his whole life. That hadn't been an act. Whatever else was true, that had been real. Eleanor closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to trust in impossible things or retreat to the safety of her small, predictable life. Tonight she would dream of amber eyes and try to believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could be real, even for ordinary girls who had never believed they deserved them. Elena had been avoiding Dominic's calls for 6 days when the flowers started arriving. The first bouquet appeared on Monday, white roses with a simple card that read, "I'm still waiting. D." Elena stared at them for 20 minutes before putting them in water, her hands shaking as she arranged the stems. Tuesday brought sunflowers, bright and defiant in her grey apartment. Wednesday was lilies, their scent filling the small space until Eleanor felt dizzy with it. By Thursday, her studio looked like a greenhouse, and her neighbours were starting to ask questions. Eleanor ignored the flowers the same way she ignored the calls. Every time her phone buzzed with Dominic's name, something painful twisted in her chest, but she didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Not when she still didn't know what to say to a man who claimed to be her mate, but lived in a world so far above hers that it might as well be another planet. Friday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Elena, we need to talk." Claire's voice was sharp with barely contained excitement. "Can you meet me for lunch?" Elena almost said no. She'd been avoiding Claire too, knowing her sister would want to dissect every moment of the coffee shop revelation and probably tell her she was being an idiot for not immediately throwing herself at the Alpha King's feet. But something in Claire's tone made her pause. "Is everything okay?" "Just meet me at Rosario's, 1 o'clock. And Elena?" Claire's voice dropped to something almost conspiratorial. "Wear something nice." Elena stared at her phone after Claire hung up, unease prickling along her spine. In her experience, Claire only got that excited about things that were either very good or very bad for Elena specifically. Rosario's was an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place Claire favoured when she wanted to impress someone or be seen. Elena arrived 5 minutes late, having changed her outfit 3 times and found her sister already seated at a prime table by the windows. Claire looked different. Her usually perfect blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo. Her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing a dress that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. She looked like she was dressed for a job interview or a first date, not lunch with her sister. "You look nice," Elena said cautiously, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thank you." Claire's smile was bright and sharp. "You look tired." Elena didn't take the bait. She'd been sleeping badly all week, haunted by dreams of amber eyes and the memory of gentle hands on her shoulders. The circles under her eyes were testament to that, but she wasn't about to admit it to Claire. "So what's this about?" Elena asked instead. Claire leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "I have news about your Alpha King." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Claire, what did you do?" "I did some research." Claire pulled out her phone and swiped through several screens before turning it toward Elena. "Do you know how much the Blackwood family is worth? How much influence they have?" "Elena, if Dominic Blackwood really wants you, if he really thinks you're his mate, you could have anything, anything." "I don't want anything," Elena said quietly. "Don't be ridiculous. Everyone wants something." Claire's laugh was brittle. "Elena, do you know what kind of opportunity this is? Not just for you, but for our whole family." The unease in Elena's stomach crystallized into dread. "What do you mean?" Before Claire could answer, a commotion near the restaurant's entrance drew their attention. Elena looked over and felt her blood turn to ice. Dominic was walking through the door. He moved with the same fluid grace she remembered, but there was something different about him today, something harder. He was dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than Elena's car, and every eye in the restaurant followed his progress across the room. Elena started to stand, panic flooding her system, but Claire's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Sit down," Claire hissed. "This is perfect." "Claire, what—" "Eleanor Morrison?" A woman's voice interrupted them. Elena looked up to see an elegant brunette standing beside their table, her smile polite but predatory. "I'm Sandra Blackwood, Dominic's cousin. Would you mind if I joined you?" Without waiting for an answer, Sandra pulled out the chair next to Eleanor and sat down. She was beautiful in the way that spoke of money and good breeding, her dark hair swept into a perfect chignon, her jewellery understated but obviously expensive. "Miss Morrison," Sandra continued, "I understand you've been seeing my cousin." Elena's mouth went dry. Across the restaurant she could see Dominic speaking with the hostess, his back to their table. He hadn't seen her yet, but it was only a matter of time. "I don't know what you've heard," Elena started, but Sandra waved a dismissive hand. "I've heard enough, and I have a proposition for you." Claire leaned forward eagerly, but Elena felt like she was drowning. "What kind of proposition?" Sandra's smile sharpened. "The kind that benefits everyone involved. You see, Miss Morrison, while my cousin believes in this mate-bond nonsense, the rest of the family understands that he has responsibilities. To his pack, to his bloodline, to his people, he needs a mate who can enhance his power, not diminish it." The words hit Elena like physical blows. "I see." "I don't think you do." Sandra's voice was silk over steel. "You're a lovely girl, I'm sure, but you're human. You have no pack connections, no political value, no ability to strengthen the Blackwood line. If Dominic insists on indulging this infatuation, it could destabilise everything he's worked to build." Elena could feel Claire vibrating with excitement beside her, but she couldn't focus on anything except the growing certainty that she was about to be destroyed. "However," Sandra continued, "we're prepared to make this worth your while. A substantial settlement, enough to set you up comfortably for life. All you have to do is disappear, change your name, move across the country, start fresh somewhere he'll never find you." "How much?" Claire's voice was breathless. Sandra named a figure that made Eleanor's vision blur. It was more money than Elena could comprehend, more than she could earn in a lifetime of social work. "Claire," Elena whispered, but her sister was staring at Sandra like she'd just offered them salvation. "That's very generous," Claire said carefully, "but Elena would need some time to consider. I'm afraid time is something we don't have." Sandra's smile never wavered, but her eyes had gone cold. "You see, Dominic is planning to announce your engagement at tomorrow night's charity gala. Once he does that publicly, it becomes much more complicated to resolve this situation quietly." Elena felt the world tilt sideways. Engagement? "Oh yes, he's quite determined, my cousin. He's already had the ring designed, already started planning the ceremony. He truly believes you're going to say yes." The restaurant around Elena seemed to fade into background noise. Dominic wanted to marry her. He wanted to stand in front of his world, his powerful, important world, and claim her as his mate. The thought terrified her. "So, you see," Sandra continued, "this really is the best option for everyone. You get financial security, Dominic gets a chance to find a more suitable partner, and the family avoids the scandal of him mating beneath his station." "Beneath his station?" Elena repeated the words numbly. "Elena!" Claire leaned forward, her voice urgent. "This is a good deal. This is a really good deal." Before Elena could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Elena looked up and felt her heart stop. Dominic stood behind Sandra's chair, his amber eyes blazing with a fury that made the air around him shimmer with barely controlled power. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Sandra, what an unpleasant surprise!" Sandra turned in her seat, her composure never slipping. "Dominic, I was just having a lovely conversation with your friend." "My mate." The correction was soft but absolute. "Eleanor is my mate." "Of course." Sandra's smile was razor-sharp. "I was just explaining to her how complicated things can become when personal desires conflict with familial obligations." Dominic's gaze shifted to Elena, and she saw something crack in his expression when he took in her pale face and shaking hands. "Elena, are you all right?" She couldn't answer. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. "She's fine," Claire said quickly. "We were just discussing—" "I wasn't talking to you." Dominic's voice cut across Claire like a blade, and Eleanor saw her sister flinch. When he looked back at Elena, his expression gentled. "What did they say to you?" "The truth," Sandra interjected smoothly. "About what a union between you would cost. About how she could never fit into our world. About how much easier it would be for everyone if she simply moved on." Something dangerous flickered across Dominic's face. "Stand up." "Excuse me?" "Stand up and walk away from this table before I forget that you're family." Sandra laughed, but there was an edge of nervousness to it now. "Dominic, you're being dramatic. I'm trying to help." "You're trying to manipulate my mate into leaving me." Dominic's voice had dropped to something barely human. "You're offering her money to disappear because you think she's not good enough for me. Aren't I right?" Sandra's mask finally slipped, revealing the cruel satisfaction underneath. "Look at her. Dominic, really look at her. She's sitting there shaking like a leaf because she knows I'm telling the truth. She knows she doesn't belong in our world." Elena felt every word like a physical blow. Because Sandra was right. She was shaking, and she was scared, and she did feel like she didn't belong. But then Dominic moved. He stepped around Sandra's chair and knelt beside Elena's seat, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Elena, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and the fury there took her breath away. But it wasn't directed at her. It was blazing on her behalf, protective and fierce and absolutely certain. "You are my mate," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant. "You are the other half of my soul, the woman I have been waiting for my entire life. You are brave and beautiful and kind, and I would rather spend eternity alone than settle for anyone else." Elena heard Sandra's sharp intake of breath, saw Claire's eyes widen, but she couldn't look away from Dominic's face. "But more than that," Dominic continued, "you are my choice, not because of politics or pack alliances or bloodlines, because of who you are, because when I look at you, I see home." He stood, pulling Elena to her feet with him, and turned to address the room at large. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was fixed on them. "My name is Dominic Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha. "And this woman is Eleanor Morrison. She is my mate, my equal, and if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to take it up with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could feel the weight of dozens of stares, could sense the shock and judgment radiating from the crowd. But Dominic's hand was warm and steady in hers, and for the first time in a week she felt like she could breathe. Sandra recovered first, her laugh sharp and bitter. "How romantic! But romance doesn't solve political problems, Dominic. It doesn't strengthen pack bonds or—" "Sandra!" Dominic's voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than his earlier fury. "You have 10 seconds to leave this restaurant before I have you removed, and if I ever hear of you approaching my mate again, family or not, I will make you regret it for the rest of your very short life." Sandra's face went white. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and left without another word. Claire, however, was still sitting at the table, staring at Dominic like he was a miracle she couldn't quite believe. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice honey-sweet, "I hope you understand that we never intended—" "Claire." Eleanor's voice surprised everyone, including herself. She was looking at her sister with new eyes, seeing clearly for the first time how quickly Claire had been willing to sell her out for the right price. "Stop. Elena, I was just trying to help." "You were trying to help yourself." Elena's voice grew stronger. "You've always been willing to sacrifice me if it benefited you, but I'm done pretending otherwise." Claire's face flushed red. "That's not fair. I've always looked out for you." "You've always looked out for what I could do for you." Elena took a deep breath and felt something settle into place in her chest. But not any more. She turned to Dominic, and the pride in his amber eyes made her feel like she could conquer the world. "You said you'd wait," she said quietly. "However long you need." Elena smiled, and for the first time in a week it felt real. "I don't think I need any more time, if you'll still have me." Dominic's answering smile was blinding. "Elena Morrison, will you do me the honour of becoming my mate?" She looked around the restaurant, at all the faces watching them, at the world of power and politics she was about to enter. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only certainty. "Yes," she said clearly, "yes, I will." Dominic cupped her face in his hands and kissed her in front of everyone, and Eleanor felt the golden thread in her chest blaze to life. This was what belonging felt like. This was what being chosen felt like. This was what coming home felt like. When they broke apart, the restaurant erupted in applause. Elena barely heard it. She was too busy staring into the amber eyes of the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, who had waited for her to see it too. "Are you ready for this?" Dominic asked softly, his forehead resting against hers. Elena thought about the challenges ahead, about learning to be a queen, about facing down people like Sandra who would never think she was good enough. Then she thought about the gentle strength in Dominic's hands, about the way he looked at her like she was precious, about the children like Emma who needed advocates, and the work she could do with the resources of a queen. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. For the first time in her life, Elena Morrison believed she was exactly where she belonged. 2 months later, Elena stood in the marble bathroom of what was now her suite, and stared at her reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. The woman looking back at her wore a silk dress that cost more than her old monthly rent and jewellery that had belonged to Dominic's grandmother. Her hair was styled by a woman who charged more per hour than Elena used to make in a week. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. "You're doing it again," Dominic said from the doorway, his voice warm with gentle amusement. Eleanor met his eyes in the mirror. "Doing what?" "That thing where you stare at yourself like you can't believe you're real." He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "You've been here 2 months, Elena. When are you going to stop looking surprised to see yourself in expensive clothes?" Elena leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. "Maybe when I stop feeling surprised to be here at all." It was true. Even after 2 months of living in the Blackwood estate, of attending state dinners and learning protocols from patient tutors, Eleanor still felt like she was playing dress-up. The palace, because that's what it really was, despite everyone politely calling it an estate, was larger than the entire building where she used to live. Her closet alone was bigger than her old studio apartment. "Tell me," Dominic said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "What's the hardest part today?" Elena smiled despite herself. It had become their morning ritual, Dominic asking what was challenging her, then patiently helping her work through whatever protocol or political nuance had her feeling overwhelmed. He never made her feel stupid for not knowing things that had been bred into him from birth. "The luncheon with the council wives," Elena admitted. "I still don't know the difference between a formal introduction and a casual one, and apparently yesterday I used the wrong form of address for Lady Pemberton." "Lady Pemberton is a pretentious ass who was looking for a reason to find fault," Dominic said firmly, and formal versus casual introductions are arbitrary rules designed to make people feel excluded. You're learning a language that was deliberately made complicated. Elena turned in his arms, studying his face. Don't you ever wish you'd found someone who already spoke it? Dominic's expression grew serious. Elena, look at me. He cupped her face in his hands. I spent 35 years waiting for you. 35 years watching other alphas mate with perfectly suitable women who knew all the right words and all the right people and made all the right political connections. Do you know what those marriages look like? Elena shook her head. Empty, Dominic said simply. Polite, functional, they were business arrangements dressed up as love stories. I watched my contemporaries settle for partners who enhanced their power and complemented their status, and I knew I would rather die alone than live like that. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. Then I found you, sitting alone in a restaurant, abandoned by a fool, and I knew immediately that you were worth more than all their political advantages combined. You were real in a way that no one in my world had ever been. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Even when I make mistakes. Especially when you make mistakes, because they're honest mistakes, not calculated political moves. When you called Ambassador Chen Mr. Chen instead of Your Excellency, you did it because you were nervous, not because you were trying to insult him. He could see the difference. Elena remembered that particular disaster and winced. He looked like he wanted to eat me alive. He looked like he was trying not to laugh, Dominic corrected. And afterward he told me he was more impressed with you than he'd been with any diplomat's wife in years, because you apologized sincerely, asked him to teach you the proper protocol, and then remembered it perfectly the next time. Before Elena could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Your Majesty? The voice belonged to Maria, Elena's personal assistant, a title that still made Elena feel vaguely ridiculous. Ms. Morrison has arrived for your appointment. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Claire had been requesting meetings for weeks, ever since the engagement announcement had made international news. Eleanor had been avoiding her sister's calls, but this morning Claire had shown up at the palace gates demanding to see her. Send her to the morning room, Dominic said. We'll be down in 5 minutes. After Maria's footsteps faded, Eleanor sank onto the velvet bench at the foot of their bed. I don't know if I can do this. Dominic knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. What are you afraid of? That she's right. The admission came out as a whisper. That I don't belong here, that I'm just a social worker playing dress-up, and eventually everyone will figure it out. Eleanor. Dominic's voice was gentle but firm. Do you remember the literacy program you started last month? Elena nodded. It had been her first real project as future queen, working with the PAC schools to implement a reading program for children who were struggling academically. The teachers said it was the most effective intervention they'd implemented in decades, Dominic continued. You took your experience with human child services and adapted it for our children. You saw needs that I had missed, solutions that my advisors had never considered. That's different. It's exactly the same. Dominic's grip on her hands tightened. You belong here because you make this place better. You make me better. The fact that you care more about helping children read than about whether you use the right fork at dinner, that's not a weakness. That's exactly why you're perfect for this role. Eleanor wanted to believe him. Some days she almost did, when she was working on programs for the PAC children, or when she and Dominic spent quiet evenings reading together. She felt like maybe she could grow into this life. But then she would attend a council meeting where women like Sandra looked at her with barely concealed disdain, or she would stumble over some piece of protocol, and the old doubts would come flooding back. Come on, Dominic said, helping her to her feet. Let's go face your sister, and remember, you don't owe her anything, not anymore. The morning room was one of Elena's favourite spaces in the palace, smaller than the formal parlours, with comfortable furniture and windows that looked out over the gardens. Claire was standing by those windows when they entered, and Elena was startled by how different her sister looked. Gone was the polished perfection Elena was used to. Claire's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal, her clothes expensive but understated. She looked diminished somehow. "Elena?" Claire turned as they entered, her smile nervous. "You look beautiful, like a real queen." The qualifier stung, but Elena kept her expression neutral. "Claire, thank you for coming." "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Claire's gaze flicked to Dominic, who had taken a protective position slightly behind Elena. "Your Majesty, I hope you know how grateful I am for everything you've done for Elena." Dominic's expression was politely neutral. "Elena has done everything herself." An awkward silence fell over the room. Elena gestured to the seating area, and they all sat down, Elena and Dominic on the sofa, Claire in the chair across from them. "I owe you an apology," Claire said without preamble. "What I did at the restaurant, trying to convince you to take Sandra's offer, that was wrong. I was wrong." Elena studied her sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation. "What changed your mind?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "Reality. When news of your engagement broke, I thought it would be good for me too. I thought people would want to know the Alpha King's sister-in-law, that I could use the connection somehow." She shook her head. Instead, everyone wanted to know about the woman who tried to sell her sister to the highest bidder. Eleanor felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy. "Claire?" "No, let me finish." Claire held up a hand. "I've spent the last 2 months thinking about what I did, about what it says about me as a person, and I realise that I've been treating you like an accessory my whole life, something to manage or manipulate or use for my own benefit." She looked directly at Elena. "I never saw you, the real you. I saw the sister who needed my help, who made me feel important and in control, but I never saw how strong you were, how good, how you spent your life helping other people, while I spent mine figuring out how to get ahead." Eleanor felt tears threatening again. "Claire?" "I don't deserve forgiveness," Claire continued. "I certainly don't deserve a place in your new life, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm proud of you. Watching you these past months, seeing how you've handled all this pressure and scrutiny, you're braver than I ever gave you credit for." The tears came then, and Eleanor didn't try to stop them. Dominic's hand found hers, steady and warm, but he let her handle this herself. "I missed you," Elena said quietly. "Even after everything, I missed my sister." Claire's own eyes were wet now. "I missed you too, but I understand if you can't trust me again. I understand if this is goodbye." Elena looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse, real recognition of the pain she'd caused. "It doesn't have to be goodbye," Elena said carefully. "But it can't be like it was before. I can't go back to being the sister you manage. I wouldn't want you to." Claire wiped her eyes. "You're going to be a queen, Elena. You don't need anyone to manage you." They talked for another hour, carefully rebuilding something that might, with time, become a real relationship between equals. When Claire finally left, Elena felt wrung out but oddly peaceful. "How do you feel?" Dominic asked as they watched Claire's car disappear down the drive. "Tired," Elena admitted, "but also hopeful, like maybe we can actually be sisters instead of just family." Dominic pulled her close, and Elena melted into his embrace. This feeling of being held and supported and valued was what she'd been missing her whole life. Not the palace or the jewels or the titles, but this sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. "I love you too," Dominic replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My brave, beautiful queen." That evening they walked through the palace gardens as the sun set behind the mountains. Elena wore a simple sundress and flat shoes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She felt more like herself than she had since arriving at the palace. "There's something I want to show you," Dominic said, leading her toward a part of the grounds she hadn't explored yet. They walked for several minutes until they reached a clearing where construction was obviously underway. Building materials were stacked neatly around the perimeter, and the foundation of what looked like a large building was already laid. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Your literacy centre," Dominic said simply. "I know you've been working with the existing schools, but I thought you might want a dedicated space, somewhere you could really expand the programme." Elena stared at the construction site, overwhelmed. "Dominic, this is—" "Yours, to design however you want, to staff however you think best. No bureaucracy, no council approval required, just you, helping children the way you've always helped children." Elena turned to look at him, this impossible man who saw her dreams and made them real. "How did you know?" "Because I know you." His amber eyes were warm in the fading light. "And I know that you'll never be happy just playing queen. You need purpose, work that matters. This is how you'll really rule, not from a throne but from here, teaching children, changing lives, one family at a time." Eleanor kissed him then, putting all her gratitude and love and wonder into the connection between them. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and smiled. "I think I'm finally starting to understand," she said. "Understand what?" "Why you waited for me." Elena's smile widened. It wasn't about finding someone who could fit into your world. It was about finding someone who could help you build a better one. Dominic's answering smile was blinding. "Now you're getting it." As they walked back toward the palace, Eleanor felt something settle into place in her chest. She was still learning protocols and struggling with politics and making mistakes that made her cringe. But she was also creating programs that helped children, building relationships that mattered, and loving a man who valued her heart more than her bloodline. Maybe that was what being a queen really meant. Not perfection, but purpose. Not fitting in, but making a difference. Elena Morrison was still becoming the woman she was meant to be. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of who that woman might become. 6 months later, Elena stood before the ancient mirror in the palace's ceremonial chambers and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The traditional mating gown was ivory silk that seemed to glow against her skin, embroidered with golden thread in patterns that told the story of the Blackwood lineage. The crown that would mark her as queen sat on the dressing table behind her, waiting for the moment when everything would become official. "You look like you're about to faint," said a familiar voice from the doorway. Elena turned to find Claire watching her, dressed in the deep blue that marked her as the Queen's sister. The past months had changed them both. Claire had found work at a non-profit that helped women rebuild after domestic violence, and the purpose seemed to have given her a peace Eleanor had never seen before. "I feel like I'm about to faint," Elena admitted. "What if I mess up the vows? What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if the pack doesn't accept me?" Claire crossed the room and took Elena's hands in hers. "The pack already accepts you. Have you seen the literacy programme enrolment numbers? You've got a waiting list 3 months long." It was true. The Children's Centre had opened 2 months ago, and Eleanor found herself working there almost every day, teaching children to read, helping families navigate pack politics, connecting young mothers with resources. It had become the work that made her feel most like herself. "Besides," Claire continued with a smile, "if you trip, Dominic will catch you. That man hasn't taken his eyes off you for more than 5 minutes since I arrived." Elena laughed despite her nerves. It was also true. Dominic had been hovering for days, clearly as anxious about the ceremony as she was. For someone who commanded supernatural predators for a living, he was remarkably nervous about one small human woman saying yes in front of witnesses. A knock at the door announced Maria's arrival. "It's time, Your Majesty." Eleanor took a deep breath and picked up her bouquet, white roses like the ones Dominic had sent that first week, when she'd been too scared to answer his calls. Now they seemed like a promise kept. The walk to the ceremonial hall felt like a dream. Pack members lined the corridors, heads bowed in respect, and Elena was surprised to realise she recognised many of their faces. Mrs. Henderson, whose grandson Elena had helped with his reading. Dr. Martinez, who worked with the family services programme Elena had expanded. Sarah, the young mother Elena had connected with prenatal care. These people weren't strangers anymore. They were her people. The realisation settled something nervous in Elena's chest. The ceremonial hall was ancient and beautiful, with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast coloured light across the assembled crowd. Elena saw council members and foreign dignitaries, pack leaders from across the continent, and supernatural royalty she was still learning to recognise. But when the massive doors opened and she saw Dominic standing at the altar, everything else faded away. He was magnificent in his ceremonial robes, gold thread catching the light as he moved. His hair was pulled back formally, but she could see the barely contained wildness in his amber eyes. When their gazes met across the crowded hall, his expression shifted from regal composure to something raw and hungry and entirely hers. Elena walked toward him with steady steps, no longer afraid of tripping or falling. Claire had been right. If she stumbled, he would catch her. He had been catching her from the very beginning. When she reached the altar, Dominic took her hands in his and smiled. "Hello, beautiful." "Hello," she whispered back, and felt the golden thread in her chest pull tight with recognition. The ceremony itself was a blend of ancient pack traditions and formal state requirements. Elena repeated words in the old language that she'd practiced for weeks, her voice growing stronger with each phrase. When it came time for the personal vows, Dominic spoke first. "Elena Morrison," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "6 months ago, I found you sitting alone in a restaurant, abandoned by a fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I told you then that he didn't deserve you, but what I should have said was that I hoped someday I would." Elena felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "You have challenged me, changed me, and shown me what it means to choose love over politics, purpose over protocol. You have made me a better man and a better leader. Today, I choose you as my mate, my queen, my partner in all things, not because the bond demands it, but because my heart does." When it was Elena's turn, she looked out over the assembled crowd, hundreds of faces watching her, judging her, waiting to see if the human woman was worthy of their alpha king. Then she looked back at Dominic and found her courage. "Dominic Blackwood," she began, her voice clear and strong, "when you walked into that restaurant, you didn't just save me from a terrible date. You saved me from a life of believing I wasn't worth choosing. You saw me when I couldn't see myself, valued me when I couldn't value myself, and waited for me when I couldn't trust myself." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from their warmth. "You taught me that belonging isn't about being perfect, or having the right bloodline, or knowing all the proper words. It's about finding your purpose and the people who support you in living it. Today, I choose you as my mate, my king, my partner in building something better than what came before." The ancient binding words were spoken by the pack elder, ceremonial wine was shared, and rings were exchanged. But the moment that mattered most to Eleanor was when Dominic cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, sealing not just their mating bond, but their choice to face the future together. The celebration that followed was elaborate and joyful, but Eleanor found herself most moved by the small moments. Emma, the 8-year-old from the adoption program who had finally found her forever family, presenting Elena with a hand-drawn picture of the literacy centre. The pack mothers who thanked her for the parenting support groups. The teenagers who credited her mentoring program with helping them stay in school. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself standing on one of the palace balconies, looking out over the gardens where the literacy centre stood bathed in moonlight. "Regrets?" Dominic asked, joining her at the railing. "None." Elena leaned into his warmth. "Well, maybe one small one." "What's that?" Elena smiled. "I wish we could have invited Marcus." Dominic's laugh was rich and warm. "Why on earth would you want that disaster at our wedding?" "So I could thank him." Elena turned to face her husband, her mate, her king, her partner in everything. "If he hadn't abandoned me that night, I never would have met you." "Oh, Eleanor." Dominic's voice was soft with affection. "Don't you understand yet? I would have found you anyway. Maybe not that night, but eventually. The bond would have led me to you no matter what." "You really believe that?" "I know it." He pulled her closer, and Eleanor marvelled again at how perfectly she fit against him. "You were meant for this life, for this work, for me. The only surprise is that it took me 35 years to find you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of their kingdom spread out below them. Elena thought about the children who would come to the literacy centre tomorrow, about the programmes she wanted to implement next year, about the life she and Dominic would build together. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. It was better. "Your Majesty," Maria's voice came from the balcony doorway. "There's a situation that requires your attention." Eleanor and Dominic exchanged glances. Supernatural politics didn't pause for wedding nights, apparently. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "There's a young woman at the gates, human. She says her boyfriend abandoned her at a restaurant downtown, and she has nowhere else to go. She's asking for sanctuary." Eleanor felt something click into place in her chest. She looked at Dominic and saw understanding dawn in his amber eyes. "Send a car for her," Elena said without hesitation. "Bring her to the family wing. I'll speak with her myself." After Maria left to make arrangements, Dominic smiled at his queen. "You know, most newly mated couples spend their wedding night differently." "Most newly mated couples aren't us," Elena replied, with a smile of her own. "Besides, we have the rest of our lives for wedding nights. That woman needs help now." An hour later, Elena sat in the same morning room where she had once reconciled with Claire, across from a young woman named Sarah, whose story was heartbreakingly familiar. Abandoned at an expensive restaurant by a man who had claimed to care about her, humiliated and alone with nowhere to turn. "You're safe here," Elena told her gently. "We'll find you a place to stay, help you get back on your feet. And Sarah, the man who walked away from you tonight, he didn't deserve you." As Elena spoke the same words Dominic had once spoken to her, she felt the profound satisfaction of a circle completed. She had been saved by someone who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Now she could be that person for someone else. This was what being queen really meant, not crowns or ceremonies or ancient bloodlines, but this, using her position to lift up others the way she had once been lifted up. When Sarah was settled in guest quarters and the immediate crisis handled, Eleanor finally returned to her chambers to find Dominic waiting for her. He had changed out of his ceremonial robes into simple clothes, and he was sitting by the fireplace with 2 cups of tea. "Thank you," she said, settling beside him on the couch. "For what?" "For understanding, for not expecting me to be anyone other than who I am." Dominic set down his tea and pulled her into his arms. "Elena, love, who you are is exactly why I waited 35 years for you. I don't want you to be anyone else." Elena kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the connection between them. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and smiled. "So, Your Majesty," Dominic said with mock formality, "what's next for our kingdom?" Elena thought about Sarah upstairs, about the literacy centre, about all the work still to be done. "We keep building something better, one person at a time." "I love the sound of that," Dominic murmured against her lips. Outside, the kingdom slept peacefully under the protection of an alpha king who had found his perfect match, and a queen who had found her true purpose. Inside the palace, Elena Morrison Blackwood, social worker turned queen, abandoned woman turned chosen beloved, fell asleep in the arms of her mate and dreamed of all the lives they would change together. Sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't in supernatural bonds or ancient bloodlines. Sometimes it was simply in choosing to see worth where others saw nothing, in believing that everyone deserved to be chosen, and in using whatever power you had to make that belief real. Elena had learned that lesson sitting alone in a restaurant, waiting for a man who would never deserve her. Now she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to learn it the same way. Where are you listening from? I love hearing from you in the comments. Let's meet there and share our thoughts about Elena's journey from that abandoned restaurant table to finding her true purpose as queen. If you'd like to support me and hear more stories like this one, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these tales of impossible love and second chances.